Hello and welcome to the Cardiac Cats YouTube channel. I'm your host, Jacob Shorba, and we've got breaking news. Maybe not anymore. It's been a couple hours, I guess, but I was at work this morning, couldn't record this immediately, but now I'm home. And the Jacksonville Jaguars finally have got a deal done with Josh Allen on a 5-year contract worth $150 million. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to be excited because this is finally done. You don't got to worry about, what if he randomly gets traded during the draft or if he walks after the franchise tag. That stuff is dead, right? He's on the team at least for another 3 years based off the guaranteed money on this deal. Sits at $88 million of it fully guaranteed. And we don't got to think about that stuff anymore, right? So it's really exciting. But we're going to talk about that deal. We're going to talk about really the road to get there as well, because as exciting as today is, I don't think we can forget a lot of those things. And I do want to analyze that. And then finally, I want to talk about, really evaluating this draft pick and maybe how we can apply it to the 2024 NFL draft. And it'll make more sense when we get to that conversation. But as far as the value of this deal, just talking about, is this an overpay, underpay, all that? This is right exactly where it should be. This number has been floated around for, I think at this point, months. I mean, I heard 30 million back in late February. We talked about at the end of the season. I think that was the number I threw out. That's the number almost every person has thrown out for this deal. It ends up falling right at 30 million. So not really shocking at all. And talking about where this falls, I'll actually pull this up for you guys so you can look at the contracts table. This will not be fully updated yet because we do not have the new contract over the cap yet. But he ends up being the second highest paid edge defender in the NFL. And we'll see if all 150 million will count against the cap. Maybe it's like the Brian Burns deal, where it was reported as 30 million a year. In reality, 9 million of that, as you can see here, was not actually actual cap hits. It's incentives. So it's possible. Not really my expectation, though. It should all be against the cap. I don't think there's going to be tons of incentives in this deal, if any at all. But overall, I mean, yeah, it lands on the high end, and now you have the two top pass rushers from the 2019 NFL draft that have completely taken over the edge market. And both of them deserve it. They're both fantastic football players. I don't think it can be said enough with Josh Allen. I mean, he was, I think, second in sacks this last year, tied for it. And you even have plays like against the Bills where he just, straight as it can be, hits Josh Allen, takes him down, and because he hits him hard, gets penalized and doesn't get the sack. You get plays like that in there too, where, Josh Allen may have actually had a higher number, but he's a phenomenal player, not someone I'm going to worry about, earning this deal and then being well, now I don't got to try. I don't think that's really a problem here. So I'm really excited about that. I think it's going to be great for Jacksonville to have him around for the future. Now, talking about kind of how we got here, because that's really going to be the main problem at the end of the day, and can't do anything about it now. But I think people that are going out and saying, this is perfect, this is how it should have gone, and they did nothing wrong, I don't think that's true. Because at the end of the day, there were consequences to the process of getting here. And they made the right decision today. I want to make that clear. I don't disagree with any of this at all of what happened today. But it's the fact that, first of all, last offseason, you knew you had a very good player. And for teams that are supposed to have all these people in the organization who can look at things analytically, who can watch film, that should have been apparent to them. Because you could see back in 2022, even though he's not going out and getting 17 and a half sacks that year, he was a really good football player. And he clearly had the potential to shoot up to a number like this, and things just didn't work out on the field. There were sacks that came close that maybe weren't converted, or they were throwaways. They were still positive plays that don't show up on the stat sheet. The difference this year was that Josh Allen converted those. And so if they were able to properly analyze that and say, hey, this player is clearly going to be here long term. We know he's getting better. He's still very young. Let's get this deal out of the way. And let's get it cheaper because we believe in him. that would have, first of all, been a much better situation and the best situation. Now, for myself, like, I remember saying last offseason that he was someone I wanted to extend, someone I wanted to be around here, and I already believed it. However, of course, you can go back to that video. My number was way off as far as what I thought he'd cost. And so I could understand why that decision wasn't made, but that is a miss. My bigger problem with this is knowing after the 2023 season, this is a player you have to keep. You're going to get fired if you don't. Like, I'm just going to be straight. I don't think that he has a job, speaking of Trent Baalke, if Josh Allen walks. Because this team is not going to be good this next year, and he's on the hot seat already. So, you had to keep him. You knew what the price was this whole time, which, I mean, we've known for a very long time now. $30 million a year is the number. You're so close on that deal, apparently, multiple times, and they don't get it done before the tag deadline. And the very frustrating side of this as well is the fact that we know they did not start negotiations until like a month into the offseason. And we're talking about, like middle of February. Other teams were negotiating with their players well before then. And when time is an excuse at the end of the day, there's no excuse for that being an excuse when you waited that long. That's my issue with this. And you could say, well, hey, I mean, they got him extended. Doesn't really matter that much when we're just looking at Josh Allen. This isn't going into training camp. And that's the great news of this, I will say, at least. Like, we're not going to have to worry about him getting signed right before the year and then not having practice with the new defensive coordinator. That's a huge plus in this, and I commend them for getting it done. But there was another player directly impacted in all of this, which was Calvin Ridley. Because if the Jaguars had come to an extension with Josh Allen, whether back in last offseason or middle of this year when he was breaking out, and they should have been exploring that at that point, let's be real, or after the season, before the franchise tag deadline, you could have controlled your fate with Calvin Ridley. Now, what I mean by that is that you essentially have two legitimate options with what you could have done. One is you could have franchise tagged him. You could have kept him around this year and seen how your team did. Now, I think that's what they would have done. Realistically, I think that was what the plan was way back when they got him, because they could have bypassed the second round pick. They have him under contract. You got a whole nother year. You can get something done. So I think that's what the plan was. But at the end of the day, that couldn't get done because Josh Allen had to have the tag used on him. There's no other choice. So that's one option, is you can just tag Ridley, you keep him for this year, and then you're probably extending him, right? The other option that's not talked about much is I think they could have tagged and traded him. And so, like, people will immediately respond and say, well, who's going to trade for a 29-year-old wide receiver that's, on the franchise tag? Well, here's the thing. There is value involved with being able to trade for him. And here's my argument for that. Take a team like New England Patriots. That was clearly in on the bidding. We know that for a fact. And they bid a lot on him. They were willing to pay him an amount that was worth the franchise tag, if not a little bit more. You cannot tell me that a team like the New England Patriots wouldn't be willing to trade an early day 3 pick to get the services of their top free agent priority that they wanted and to not have to bid against the market. Like, I think we absolutely could have traded Calvin Ridley for, say, pick 103 from New England. I think that was one of the options they could have had. But they didn't have that because of the way they dealt with it. And so I think that's one of the routes they could have gone. The final route, and the third option I didn't really mention, is that technically they could have done what they did, not franchise tagged him, let him hit free agency for the comp pick. And the comp pick, if they were getting it, would be pick 100. And that's why I say like 103 from New England, because I think that's where the value falls, is after the comp pick. So if that's the case, you have to go into free agency and you have to spend appropriately to where you're not going to lose that pick. However, what Jacksonville did was they basically said, yeah, we got this locked up with Calvin Ridley. We're just waiting a couple days. We're going to go spend money. We're not worried about the compensatory formula. It's not going to matter, right? Because we're going to have him back. Well, they got played at their own game, right? And Tennessee came in, offered a huge deal, and now because you've signed all these random players, and I shouldn't call them random, but what I mean by that, just to kind of make it clear, is that these are players that barely met the mark for a compensatory pick. And they're not players that I think would have been worth signing if you're trying to get the comp picks. We're talking about a third rounder. This is a valuable pick. They should have been a little bit smarter about how they spent. For example, Devin Duvernay. I like Devin Duvernay. I like what he can do as a returner. But I'm not letting a returner get in the way of me getting a third round pick. So we can go down, we can look at this for Jacksonville. They're going to end at the end of the day probably 3 players off. And so you got to ask, like on some of these additions, maybe you could have waited. There's still players out there that they could have signed. A lot of these, other than, Darnell Savage and Gabriel Davis, were players that, I think you could have gone in their route to try to take advantage of this and get the third round pick. Now, it's debatable, but at the end of the day, this is your third option, right? Jacksonville didn't take advantage of any of those. And it all comes down to the fact that they had one option, and that was, well, actually 2 technically. One was to just extend him in free agency, and the other one was to get the comp pick. They couldn't do either of those. And so that's my issue with this. It's a long-winded rant and lots of that, but that's the problem with getting here and how it was handled. The process was very poor by Jacksonville, and this should have been dealt with before, so you at least have more options. I could understand if maybe he even walked during free agency because he didn't want to pay him that much, and then, you just don't have your compensatory free agent signed, and you're not getting a third rounder. Like, I could get some of those scenarios. It's the fact that they did nothing to prepare for this. And that's my frustration at the end of the day. But at the end of the day, too, like, this is done. Calvin Ridley's a Titan. We're not getting a comp pick. We know that at this point. And we got Josh Allen for 5 years. And I'm happy about that because I don't want to hear anything else about him getting traded. Like, it's done. He's on the team for a long time. You can go buy your jerseys and not have to worry about it. Now, the other side of this that I want to talk about, and this is regarding the draft more so, and a point I want to make because I see so much stuff on Twitter where people are saying we have to take a wide receiver at 17. It has to happen. Or maybe it's we have to take Kool-Aid McKinstry at 17. We have to take like a corner. Maybe it's Quinyon Mitchell, A.D. Mitchell, whatever Mitchell it is, whatever player, right? But people are getting so focused on it having to be a certain position to where they're advocating to reach down the board. And the alternative to that is to just say, well, maybe I'll just put A.D. Mitchell at 8th on my board, so he's the top player and just happens to be at a position of need, right? You can find your way around that, but it's not honest. The issue with that, and I think this gets proven by the Josh Allen extension and by his career in Jacksonville and how he got here, is that you don't win reaching for needs in the draft. And this is the prime example of it. So let's look at really the 2019 draft to talk about this. Josh Allen was supposed to go, I think, at the absolute latest in the top 4 picks. I think the Raiders were 4th overall, and we can actually, I'll pull this up too, 2019 NFL draft results. And we'll look at each pick just so you can see, and ignore the grades here because the Josh Allen one's pretty bad. I saw it earlier. But you're getting Kyler Murray, Nick Bosa, Quinnen Williams. Those made sense. This was the floor for Josh Allen, was what we thought. He went past Las Vegas. Tampa Bay went with Devin White, who was a really highly rated prospect at that time. And the Giants shocked everyone with Daniel Jones. Jacksonville at that point, coming out of 2018, had the very bad season after making a huge run before that. They needed offensive help. Everyone on the planet knew that. And so people were saying, like, we got to go offense. We have to get a player on that. One of those players who was mentioned would be TJ Hockenson. You can also talk about some other offensive prospects in this class. But at the end of the day, you look at those names, they aren't as good as Josh Allen. And so the Jaguars had a choice in 2019 because they could say, well, we don't really need him, and we have positions of need on the offense that maybe are more important this year. So let's, go out, let's pick a player at a position of need, even if they're not ranked as high on our board. And they were coming out of a similar situation. I want you to keep that in mind because while the record was worse than maybe 2023, they were coming off a very disappointing season. And so they had a choice to make, even with them being on a bit of a hot seat. And so that was one of the choices. The other one could be for them to say, well, hey, we may not need Josh Allen, but you look down the road. You look maybe at the end of this year and beyond. This is a player that clearly can have a role in Jacksonville, is going to be the best player in this draft. We're not going to regret this move after a year or two. And I don't know if you'd even regret the first year because he got 10 plus sacks. And so Jacksonville made the right choice. They said, we're going to get the best player on the board. They picked Josh Allen, even though he wasn't a big need. They could have gone Hockenson, got this great tight end, and he's a fantastic player today. He really is. But as far as value, it's not close between him and Josh Allen. It's just not. So they had a choice, and they made the right choice, even with pressure of having to pick certain positions on offense to try to turn things around. And do we regret that today? No, because Josh Allen just signed the first $100 million contract in Jacksonville Jaguars history. So how do we apply this? Well, it's pretty clear. It ain't about having to take a wide receiver. It ain't about having to take a cornerback. Whatever position you feel like, right? We can agree that there would be positions that it would be ideal if we were able to take them. But I think we have to understand at the end of the day that you're better off taking the best player on the board because that player, as long as you can see them having a spot on your team as a starter within that first or second year, you pick them up and you take them. And so this year, maybe it's A.D. Mitchell versus Jerzon Newton or Olu Fashanu. A.D. Mitchell might be a great football player, and there's a good chance of that, but there's also concerns with him. He's not a player I have ranked as high. Maybe you can use Brian Thomas Jr. as an example. Let's say that. Maybe A.D. Mitchell's off the board, and we're feeling like we have to go take a wide receiver still. You may feel like you're better off this year having Brian Thomas Jr., but at the end of the season and beyond, you're going to wish that you made the other pick if things turn out the way we're going to think they're going to turn out. So at the end of the day, for me, this year, it would be great to get certain positions, but I care the most about getting the best player on the board that we can say maybe 10 years down the road was a fantastic draft pick and hopefully is going to be ending their career in Jacksonville. That's your goal. Those are the players you want. That's how you approach the draft. So I think this is the chief example of that for us as fans. So just something I wanted to say. Now, final thing I'll talk about here, just as far as money, cap hits, some of the numbers I've got written down here. This is from my mock rebuild. If you want to check it out, it's on my Twitter. I'm going to be doing this over a few years, so I'm going to compare my choices to the actual team, kind of challenge myself as a scout and just as far as my decisions and thinking. But I have real life numbers on here, which is the important thing. And so right now, I don't know if this is the cap hit. It's likely to change, but I've got APY updated. We'll surely have more money pushed down the road just because of the nature of the contract, right? Because they're not going to take this huge cap hit this year. So right now, when you look at their spending, their effective spending this year on players, is not the cap hit. I want to make that clear. If you're spending more than what the overall cap space you're allotted for the year is, you're going to be effectively pushing more money down the road. It's like essentially driving up your credit. You're getting driving up your balance on your credit card. So maybe you have a $4,000 balance. You're going from $1,500 to $2,000 if you're spending over that. If you're spending under, you're paying it off. Jacksonville's very close to the actual number, but it should be noted this will go up a bit after draft selections. And if Jacksonville decides to make a big move, they are going to be well over this number. They still got a lot of money pushed down the road. That's going to increase. I think at this point, that's something we have to consider, because if we're talking about making a trade for Brandon Ayuk, or maybe next year we're signing T. Higgins, we do got to start watching these numbers, because Trevor Lawrence this year, $9 million average per year, right? You get 2025, goes up 25 million. After that, we're probably talking about 55 million. So these numbers are going to start going up. It's something to watch. Now, of course, I was always going to extend Josh Allen. Like, I always wanted them to do that. My mind has never changed on it. So it's nothing really like me being upset with it, but just something to look at as far as numbers. And for next year, just the spending we already have, and I include fifth-year options for Lawrence and for ETN, we are currently under what is a high projection, have about 50 million effectively that we can spend on contracts. So say you add a player like Eric Armstead, which you already did, of course, like, it's not changing by the cap hit here. It's changing by that 14 million a year mark. So that's kind of where we sit there. And we've got a really good roster, I think, overall. I think you've got some needs, of course. But I think you can look at parts of this team and say there's some clear strengths. And now, like, the big thing from this is that we don't have to worry about camp holdout. We don't got to worry about Josh Allen missing half the training camp and not being ready for the season, and having a Nick Bosa like 2023 season in 2024, because that guy got signed like literally the first week of the year. And so I'm very happy we avoided that. I think we got a lot to work with. Now, we'll see how the draft falls, of course, but overall, like, I feel a lot more confident now that Josh Allen's locked up, now that we know he's going to play. You're really just looking at probably getting your Zay Jones replacement. I think you could definitely use upgrading your offensive line long term. I would very much be in the market for a left tackle of the future or a right tackle of the future. Just kind of depends on what player's best, because I think Anton can go left or right. But you'll be looking at those positions. And I think as well, you want some pass rush depth. Travis Gibson right now is the top backup pass rusher. I don't think that's great at this point. And, you do got DeJuan Smoot sitting out there. And now that you're not going to get the comp pick, it's not really a reason to not bring him back. So he's someone I'd be looking at. I think he'll get better after recovering from the injury. And then you want to get another cornerback. So Ronald Darby's fine starting. Just a lot of injury concerns throughout his career, though. So that's what's worth noting there. But overall, guys, it's exciting news. Be happy today. We got a player locked up for a very long time on the biggest deal in our franchise's history. It'll probably be beat out either later this offseason or next offseason by Trevor Lawrence. But I am happy for Josh Allen. He gets to be the guy who says I was the first $100 million player in Jacksonville's history. So great stuff there. Let me know what you think about this. Do you like the deal? Do you think they paid him too much? Do you think they paid him too little? I don't think that will be an opinion, but, just give me your thoughts on it. Very much excited for it. I plan to probably put out a cornerback rankings video along with another mock draft next, and we'll kind of move through the defensive line as well. And then 2 weeks from now, I'll be heading up to my brother's house. We'll be doing draft coverage there. I'll be live streaming the whole first round with him. That'll be really exciting. So if you guys want to join that on draft day, talk to Jags fans and all that, we'll be live for that as well. But that's what I've got for you today. I hope you all have a great rest of your Wednesday. Enjoy the day. Enjoy this signing. And finally, go Jags.